Everyone join us on Zoom and YouTube. Today, we are very honored to have Dr. Peichen Zhong with us. Dr. Peichen Zhong is an assistant professor on the NUS Presidential Young Professorship at the Department of Material Science and Engineering, National University of Singapore. He received his Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of Science and Technology of China in 2018, followed by a PhD in Material Science from UC Berkeley in 2023. He then completed the postdoctoral work at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Berkeley Institute of Digital Materials for the Planet. As a computational material scientist, he is interested in computational modeling of complex materials for renewable energy applications, atomistic simulations with statistical mechanics and first-principle calculations, and AI for science, particularly in machine learning, interatomic potentials, and generative models in scientific applications. The title of Dr. Zhong's talk today is Foundation Potentials and Generative Modeling for Material Science. Well, Peichen, you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Zhiyuan, for the very nice introduction. I'm very happy to share some of my recent work. Most of the work is done during my postdoc at Berkeley. Today I want to talk about what is the recent progress in the machine learning potential, particularly that has been trained on a large-scale data set. And in the second part, I want to talk about how the generative modeling can help us to designing for the material science problem. I'm not an AI expert. I'm a user to migrate to the very wonderful knowledge in the AI community and to see how this can be adapted for the material or chemical problems. So for the first part, I want to talk about how can we use machine learning interatomic potential for the forward design of the materials. So let me first give some very basic introduction to what is the interatomic potential. So basically, the interatomic potential is the way how we describe how the atoms interact with each other. For example, the very famous or the classical potential is an Jones potential. It's an analytic potential that contains the repulsion part and the attraction part. By having this interatomic potential, you can describe how the atoms interact, and taking the derivatives, you can get the interatomic force and the stress. Having all this information, then you can run the molecular dynamics to get the equilibrium or the non-equilibrium materials properties. And in recent years, there is a huge effort in study how to migrate the machine learning to study the interatomic potentials. So this is known as a machine learning potential. In MLP, people first used some encoding of the local chemical environment, also known as fingerprints of the atoms, and then use the machine learning to map this environment to the site energy. By summing over all the site energy, you get a complex landscape of the total energy. This is known as the interatomic potential. So the typical way for constructing the interatomic potential is use the graph architecture, so also known as a message passing graph neural network. So in a message passing graph neural network, you can construct the transform the molecules or the crystal into a graph where the node can be considered as where the atoms can be considered as a graph node, and the bond between the atoms can be considered as a graph edge. By transforming the chemical information or the species or the bond information or the angle information, you can pass the messages from the neighbors to the next neighbor and to the next neighbor. After several times of message passing, the central atom can get basically the information around of all the neighbors within a cutoff radius. So this is known as a graph neural network. And based on this, you can use the graph node information to get the site energy. By summing over all the site energy, you can derive the interatomic forces and the stress. The development of graph neural network is nicely demonstrated into the interatomic potential. But what I and we are thinking about is what can we do differently instead of the interatomic potential? So after the message passing, we can use the graph node information to predict the various properties. For example, the magnetic moments. The magnetic moments is a very important quantities for the transition metal oxide. If you get this information, then you can do some infer of the atomic charge. So in this work, known as CHGGen, we do not only predict the energy and the forces, but we can predict the magnetic moments. And based on the magnetic moments, we can classify which valence state of the metals in the transition metal oxide, and then we can study the transition. We can study the charge transfer problems together with the dynamic simulation. So this is like a very brief introduction to the machine learning potential. So this is the landscape of the development adapted from the slide from Bowen, now at MIT. In 2027, the Bella Paranano proposed the first neural network potential based on the descriptor. And in 2018, there's the major development of the graph model for the crystals. And in 2019, the atomic class expansion was proposed, and now it becomes most of the state-of-the-art descriptors in the interatomic potential. And one major thing happens is M3GNet. That's the first universal interatomic potential that has been trained on the whole periodic table. And that basically shows that you can train the machine learning potential based on a lot of decades of DFT calculation that can show the general purpose application. And in 2023, CHGGen is proposed, and we released the MP trajectory dataset. And after that, there are so many works from both industry and academia to show that if you can scale the model size and the dataset, you can achieve a very good performance. I can give you some anecdote about the development. So in 2023, when the CHGGen was first released, that is the best machine learning model in discovering the thermodynamic stable materials according to the MapBench discovery. So basically, if you get a higher score on this leaderboard, that means your model can predict a better stabilities according to the out-of distribution. Now, that's the best machine learning model in 2023. But according to the leaderboard last month, the CHGGen becomes the worst machine learning model because there are numerous development in both dataset and the model architectures. And you can see many of the big giant effort has been put into this type of development. This is like how the foundation model was introduced. But recently, I'm thinking about they are very good, but most of the architectures are based on the short range architecture. That means the atom can see within a cutoff radius. This type of short range machine learning potential can fall short. And how can we deal with like a long range interactions and more generally with the atomic charges? So when I did my postdoc with Professor Bingqing Chen, she developed the latent Ewald summation. In latent Ewald summation, this is another type of way to deal with the node prediction. For example, after the graph generation and message passing, we are not only to predict the magnetic moments, but we can predict the atomic charge. And this atomic charge is a latent variable. And based on this latent charge, you can calculate the structure factor and use this structure factor to compute what is the long range interactions. And adding this long range interactions back to the total energy, then the total energy has the long range energy part. And then take the derivatives to get the interatomic force and stress. Then the simulation is like has the perceptionness of the whole periodic system. And this is how the long range can be captured. The next thing is that how can we think about the charge? So based on the prediction of the latent charge, we map the relationship between the latent charge, known as the less charge, with the DFT charge. There is some correlations, but the correlation is not linear or agree with each other very well. But if we look at some quantities known as the dipole moment, that's the charge times the displacement of the atoms in the three-dimensional space. If we analyze the component of the dipole moment, we can see that the correlation between the DFT dipole and the charge-derived dipole agrees quite well. And most importantly, the blue one is the machine learning derived latent charge, and another three is the partial charge from the DFT or conventional approach. You can see that they basically show very similar trend compared to the DFT. So that means if you believe the partial charge derived dipole is physical as demonstrated in the conventional approach, then the machine learning derived charge is as physical as them. So this is a very inspiring result that we can indeed use the energy and interatomic forces to get some response, get to derive or infer some useful physical quantities such as charge. And based on the dipole agreement on the dipole and quadrupole moment with the DFT, we are thinking about if we can get the moment correct, how about the polarization? Because polarization is basically the charge times the displacement and sum over all the in a periodic system. And if you can take the auto differentiation of polarization with respect to the perturbation of its position, then you can get a quantity known as Ball effective charge. So this is the tensor that can be measured or that can be measured or have very distinct physical quantities. For example, it also equals to the derivatives of the forces with respect to the external electric field. That means if you have the prediction of the Boring effective charge, then you can apply an external field and see how the system evolve under the electric field. So yes, we try to predict the polarization and derive the Boring effective charge in the water data set. Naively, if you directly sum all the charge with the times the displacement, then you can get something. This result is not that satisfactory. You can see that it's very far away from the linear correlation. This is because that in a periodic system, you cannot simply compute the polarization by summing over Qi times Ri, because when the atoms go across the boundary conditions, then that will come back to the rag coordinates. And this is non-trivial in topology, which is related to the Berry phase. So to deal with that, you need to compute the polarization in a complex form and then times the d phase factor and take the real part to get the Boyle effective charge. This is a way how we deal with the periodic condition in the simulation box. And after that, one can see the Boyle effective charge derived from the machine learning agrees very well with the DFT. So this is like I think this is a very significant result because the BEC here is learned from the energy and force. And the energy and force is a very fundamental quantities in physics. And you can basically extract the response properties based on these fundamental quantities and compare with the observables such as the BEC. So what can we learn or what can we do with such quantities? The first thing is the experimental characterization. For example, the infrared spectroscopy in the experiments. So basically, experimentally, you can measure the IR spectroscopy of the water, and you can also do the computational modeling to derive these quantities by calculating the autocorrelation of the quantum densities, where the J equals to the BEC times the velocity in the molecular dynamics simulation. These quantities can be directly inferred or derived from the simulation. So in this figure, the gray shady area is the experimentally measured IR intensities, and the black line is the computational modeling derived results based on the prediction of the Boyle effective charge and the velocity during the MD simulation. You can see that they agree quite well with each other. And indeed, you can add the external electric field and see how the system evolve according to the electric field applied to the water system. That also agree with the experiments. So as a comparison, if you use like a fixed charge, for example, hydrogen for +1 and oxygen for -2, the results is the blue line that is far off the experiments. And conventionally, people typically introduce like polarizable corrections, use a polarizable force field to do the correction. But in the machine learning force field, if you can use the latent Ewald summation to describe the long range and get the inference of the response charge, then you do not have to do such a type of correction. You can just learn from the energy and force and get the spectroscopy correct. And after that, we want to do something more challenging. That's the ferroelectricity. So we know that ferroelectricity is like a response properties of the solid state materials, also known as a complex oxide. So the lead titanate is a very famous example that exhibited the spontaneous polarization at room temperature. For example, when the system is equilibrated, the c-axis will be elongated and show a spontaneous polarization. And after the polarization, the charge of the both lead, titanium, and oxygen will show abnormally large magnitude compared to its nominal charge. For example, the nominal charge is -2, but actually the dynamic charge in this is sorry, the Bohr effective charge in this system is much larger than the -2. So we use the latent Ewald summation to learn from energy and force and to derive the Bohr effective charge. We see that indeed the charge from the inference is much larger than its magnitude of the nominal charge, and generally that also agree with the DFT ground truth compared to the machine learning model. And another nice thing is that we found that if we compute the polarization from the molecular dynamics simulation, the magnitude of the derived quantities agrees pretty well with the experimental measured quantities. That's the 81 microcoulomb per centimeter square, and in derived from MD simulation is almost the same scale. And what is more crazy thing is that once the system is equilibrated, you can actually add the external electric field to see how the system evolve. For example, if you flip the electric field, and actually you can basically flip the polarization into the reverse direction, and we simulate the whole hysteresis loop as a function of the electric as for the polarization as a function of the external field, and basically reproduce the nice hysteresis loop people observing the experiments. So this is somehow an exciting moment because the hysteresis loop is the first time that is derived from the simulation based on only energy and interatomic force. That means you do not have to do a lot of like a perturbation calculation that is computationally expensive, but you can use the power of machine learning to capture the interactions between the atoms and derive the response properties. And scientifically, doing the simulation at large scale and with the machine learning force field can give you some insights. For example, for the polarization flip, after you add the external electric field, we see that how the polarization evolve during the non-equilibrium molecular dynamics. At the stage one, every vertex represents that the unit cell is positively polarized. Once the electric field is turned on, you can see some domain, they first nucleate, and then they grow and coalesce, and finally form the uniform negatively polarized domain. So this is consistently with the recent observation of the simulation from Princeton team. They show that the first order phase transition in the lead titanate is also driven by the nucleation. And finally, the latent Ewald summation as the augmentation way to introduce the long range and the charge inference is a universal. So in this test, we check the mainstream machine learning potential such as Maze, NeQuip, CHGGen case. We see there is a systematic drop in energy and force error. And for all of the machine learning potential model, that shows the capability to infer the Bohr effective charge. And another nice result is that including the long-range interactions can give you some corrections to derive the right physical quantities. For example, the density of organic liquid. If you do not include the long-range interactions, for example, that's the maze off, the results is a little bit far away from the the experimental observables. But after the long-range interactions has been turned on with a less augmentation, you can see the error is much more reduced. And another benefit regarding the long-range model is that this can actually give you a better quantification of the uncertainties. So in this test, we indeed train a model in a simple ionic crystal structures, and we do an out of distribution test that we create a heterogeneous solid-solid interface, and we first evaluate what is the force error from the short range model and long range model. Indeed, the force error is much reduced by having the long range interactions. But what is more useful is that if you train like different models with a short range machine learning potential and a long range machine learning potential, and you calculate the standard deviation as a quantification of the uncertainty, the short range model basically tell you the uncertainty is really low. That means if you run the simulation or do samplings with the short range model, your simulation can go wrong without any notification. However, for the long range model that can tell you at the interface, particularly this atomic local environment is not well sampled. That means you need to do more DFT to capture the local environment to improve the performance of the machine learning model. Okay. So any questions so far? And after that, I can go to the inverse design. Okay, yeah, good. Then, in the last part, I talked about how the machine learning potential was uh, introduced, and that is a very powerful tool in materials modeling. We can use this to do the like virtual screening and do a lot of large scale simulation to derive the some mechanical understanding on why the material works and why do they not they do not work. And in the second part, I want to talk about if we don't know a certain species or the local environment in unknown chemical space, how can we use the generative model for the inverse design? For example, a critical question in material science is the crystal structure prediction. That means you give a chemical space, if you give you a composition, how can you predict the stable or low energy structures? This is like a potential energy landscape. You can certainly use the machine learning potential to search what is the stable structure, but that's computationally inefficient. Particularly, you don't want to start with the structure like a random arrangement, but instead you want to get some good priors that have some reasonably bounding environment, and then do the searching. So we need to think about a way that to get a void with a random atom arrangement. One way to do this is to run the diffusion model, because this is like an AI community talk, so many people are familiar with that. So in the diffusion model, for the forward process, you put a noise into the distribution and you learn what is the scoring function. And once you have a score function, then you solve like a reverse stochastic differential equation and to remove the noise from to sample new configurations. So this can be adapted to the crystal structure prediction. For example, in the three-dimensional structures, we use the graph neural network to get the score function. In this way, we first have an input structure, and we put that into for example, the SE3 equivariant graph neural network, and we predict what is the score on each atom, which is a vector. The SE3 equivariant graph network has a rotational equivariance. If you rotate the structure, then the output will rotate accordingly. To train this model, we first perturb a crystal structure with a Gaussian noise and put that into the neural network and predict the vector, and to see what is the difference between the perturbation and the noise, and construct the denoising score matching error to minimize the MSE between the two vector. And after that, then you can parameterize the diffusion model. So if you compare the diffusion model with the machine learning potential, there are some similarities. In machine learning model, you minimize the energy and force, but in diffusion model, you minimize the score function with the perturbation. And you can both do simulation atomistically. For the machine learning potential, you do molecular dynamics or structural relaxation. But in diffusion model, basically the simulation or the relaxation process is governed by the score function. And the score function is the gradient of logarithm of the probability distribution, but for the machine learning potential, that's the gradient of the energy. So basically, the two are equivalent if you consider the system as a parabolic potential. Uh, so how can we use that for designing materials? So one of the interesting problem is to find battery materials without the lithium. So this is how a lithium ion battery works. When you charge and you discharge your batteries, the lithium intercalated between the anode and the cathode. And one of the important part is the cathode materials. So you can either start with the cathode material that containing the lithium, or you can start with the cathode material without the lithium. Particularly for the non-lithium containing cathode, if you want to do the high throughput screening search, this can be hard because generally people start with the composition. They first look at the crystal structure database and whether the materials contain the lithium, and they compute the properties. If they do not contain the lithium, we don't know how to put the lithium in and do the derivation accordingly. So this can be constructed as a machine learning problem. If you give you a host, how to put the lithium into the right place. So the predicting the intercalated problem can also be approach by the generative model, such as diffusion model. This is like a similar problem that has been nicely demonstrated in the computer vision. For example, the inpainting generation. So if you give you a picture and a masking function, you basically want to generate a different gestures or different component of the picture without changing the context. So the inpainting generation has been demonstrated using the repainting method with the resampling techniques in the graph. So we adopted these techniques into the crystal structure generation. That's basically you give you a host. How can we optimize the remaining part in the of, for example, the lithium to generate the new crystal structures under the context. So we modify the diffusion process, the reverse diffusion process, keep the predictor step, corrector step, but use the masking and the noising, by adding the masking and noising host step and do the resampling several times. And here is the animation how the reverse diffusion is accomplished. You can see the left side is the manganese oxide host, and by gradually reduce the noise away, the lithium can be put into the right position without changing the a background of the host structures. And why this is useful? This How can we use the inpainting for the real designing problems? So um,
Sorry, can I ask a question?
sure.
How in this in painting for crystal structure step, how do you inject your structure knowledge into the algorithm? I I didn't follow, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So for the impending generation, you train the diffusion model as the unconditional generation process. So basically, you train the model exactly the same as the unconditional diffusion model it did. You train that using a denoised matching without separating the host or the guest atom. But during the generation, you apply the additional step. That's the masking and the resampling. Um, you can use the one model that can do everything, but for the impending. So impending is an inference-only approach. The additional step is the resampling and masking. The other steps are exactly the same as the reverse diffusion with the SDE.
I see. So the original structure is not necessarily embedded, but with the masking process, it kind of learns the what the structure should look like. Is that the
Yeah, yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah. So the reason why imprinting is useful is because if you directly do like unconditional generation at scale, the structures can lose some crystallinity. For example, we did some like a crazy test. If you give you like a very large unit cell, let's say beyond the 10 angstrom and do the generation, the result shows that the diffusion model indeed can capture the short range or local correlation, for example, the RDF of the generated structure. And we compare the generated local coordination number and the RDF with the structure derived from the materials project database. That's where the model is trained on. It shows that there is some agreement between the generated structures and the training data. But because the model is based on a GNN structure, that GNN structure has a certain limited cutoff for the perception length. So once the size of the generated structure become large, then it cannot capture a very long range order crystallinity. So that means if you directly use the unconditional structures for the generation, you can get some like a mosaic or amorphous structure. But can be hardly used for crystal structure generation. Particularly, we are losing some symmetries. Um, because we care about some of the battery material systems, such as polyanion groups. Polyanion groups means that the building block is consisted by 4 or 5 atoms, where the central atom is like a phosphorus, and the neighboring atoms can be fluorine or the oxygen. Their orientation or the placement of the polyanion groups is important for the properties that we care about. So doing inpainting generation by keeping the topology or the local geometries of the polyanion groups is important. So this is the computational framework that we used for the crystal structure generation. That is basically composed by 2 steps. The first step is that we do some random search on the Bravia lattice and do a unconditional diffusion process. And after that, we use the machine learning potential to do some relaxation to get the optimized volume. And after this step, there are some certain local bounding environment formed. And then we remove the guest atoms such as lithium away and do the structural refinement. And after this step, we get the symmetrized structures. And then we do the inpainting generation with some constraint on the framework. And after a second step, we can derive the thermodynamic stabilities by comparing the phase diagram to the materials project database. And after that, we run DFT and confirm the structure is stable. So I will give you one example on how this can be used for the real science problem. So that's related to the solid-electrolyte interface in batteries. So this animation showed that how when a battery works the electrolyte is different molecules. They carry a lithium back to the surface of the electrode, and there are some passivation reactions happen, and this will form a passivation layer. And in the inner part of the layer, there are mostly the products of the inorganic component that will be formed at the surface of the anode. And we want to know what is the chemical composition of the component and what is the atomic configuration of this component, and whether this component is conducting lithium. Because the passivation layer will conducting the lithium, otherwise the battery will not work. And they should also be like electronic insulating to prevent the further passivation reactions. One of our hypotheses is that the lithium phosphor oxide fluoride is the K component in this space, but we don't know or do not have many prior knowledges of any of the crystal structures in this domain. So this is quite similar to the AlphaFold problem, because in AlphaFold problem or in the proton folding problem, you are giving a one-dimensional amino acid as an input information, and you want to predict what the three-dimensional structures. And in the crystal structure prediction, that's similar. You give a string that's a one-dimensional sequence, and we want to use the diffusion model to get the three-dimensional structures. And another thing that is similar between the SEI and the proton folding is that the characterization of this technique of the structures rely on the very expensive cryo TEM or the cryo XPS that can be quite expensive in the experiments. So if we can use this to give some hints from atomistic simulation and AI guided generation, that would be great. So we used CHGGen to generate the crystal structures in this lithium phosphor oxide fluoride chemical space. And indeed, after the screening of using the machine learning potential and DFT that is based on the AutoScan functional, we indeed find one stable crystal structure uh, uh, that is stable than compared to the existing materials project database with negative decomposition energies. And after that, we can use like a standardized molecular dynamics simulation to melt the system and quench the system and understand how the morpho structures may look like and derive the conductivities of the lithium from the simulation. So this is how the structure look like. Basically, the structure preserve the phosphor oxide, oxygen, and the fluorine building block, and the lithium is connecting corner sharing with this building block and extending in the three-dimensional system, and that is stable, confirmed by DFT. And then we derived the molecular dynamics simulation using the machine learning potential, and we found that if you the intrinsic diffusivities for this crystalline material is extremely low. That basically the lithium is very stable and they do not diffuse. However, if you make the material amorphous, um, then the diffusivities becomes more significant at the room temperature. And from the simulation, we also confirm the arrangement in the simulation of the local chemical environment is indeed a amorphous structure. And this can somehow explain the experimental result. So this is the morphologies of the SEI derived from the cryo-TEM. Experimentalists, they confirm that there are crystallinity nanodomain, for example, for the lithium fluoride and lithium oxide, and they are embedded into the amorphous matrix. And indeed, we use our simulation to compute what is the amorphous energy. That's basically the potential energy of the amorphous structure minus its potential energy in the crystalline structure. We found that the material that we generate, it has a very low morphization energy. That's just almost the 30 MeV per atom. But if you compare this value with the confirmed nanocrystalline domain in the experiments, such as lithium carbonate, lithium fluoride, and the lithium oxide, they are much higher compared to the lithium oxide fluoride. And this means that it is more easier to morphize the structures in the real condition. That may suggest the amorphous matrix can correspond to this chemical space, and that it can enable the fast lithium diffusion. And using the machine learning potential, we can also derive some nice quantities. That's the density of atomic states. For example, you can use the graph node to predict the site energy and do a histogram of the site energy. For the crystalline material at 300 K, we can see the distribution is very narrow. That means the lithium is like locked into a very deep local potential. You need a very high thermal activation to activate the transport or the hopping of the lithium. But if you make the materials amorphous, that means the lithium can be placed into a different local environment that has a more flattened or frustrated energy landscape. So if you apply for external electric field, they can diffuse much easier compared to the crystalline material. And another thing that is interesting is that the defect energy. We know that the materials cannot be perfect under the real condition. So, for example, the lithium interstitial defect means that you can put an additional lithium into the structure where there is a vacancy, where the local environment is vacant, and we can compute the defect energies of the amorphous and crystalline materials in different composition, and we see that upon the morphization of the structures, there is a very wide distribution of the defect energies. And the lithium oxide fluoride basically show generally lower defect energies compared to the lithium carbonate. That means it is easier to put additional lithium into the structure to make it as a conducting phase. So this is an example how we started from the generative model and to tackle the one of the challenging problems in the battery community. That's the understanding why the lithium is conducting in the SEI phase. So um, here is the open source package for the ChargeNet. That's the machine learning potential, and for the ChargeGen, that's the diffusion model, particularly designed for the polyanion containing structure generation. You are welcome to check that. And here is some of my conclusion and perspective on the atomistic and generative modeling. The first thing is that the foundation potential that has been trained on large-scale data set with including long-range and the electrical response property augmentation, they are very powerful. And in the future, maybe they will substitute like a 70 or 80% of the DFT calculation, and people do not have to run expensive, very expensive first principle calculation. And the second thing is that generative modeling is on the way. We can see there are still some challenges. For example, for the crystal structures, how to capture the long-range crystallinities, and whether to add or not add the equivariance is still under the debate. But we already see they can be used for some certain design problems. And third thing is that the intersection is very interesting. How can we benefit from the both method and to see the similarities between the two? There are already some progress and showing that you can use the diffusion model to do the sampling to mimic the the long time molecular dynamics simulation. And how can we benefit both method to for better generation or for better sampling? It will be a promising future directions. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any question on the topic.
Great. Peichen, thank you so much for the insightful presentation. We will now move to the Q&A session. Any questions?
I have a question on kind of the general, I guess, maybe meta question of like how material scientists typically work with each other. Are these tools general tools that any material scientist will use, or mostly people are looking for more of like systems that can design new materials for them, I guess?
Yes, I think, for example, the foundation potential nowadays people are heavily use this model for evaluating the stability of the suggested new materials, and using foundation potential, you do the first step always like using this type of models to get relaxed structure and confirm with DFT, and then people select the material that is thermodynamic stable and to see how they can be synthesized in the experiments. So a lot of startups are working on this, and they're building the robotic lab to realize the synthesis. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think your work shows very promising approaches. Because my research is in battery, so I'm
Yeah.
particularly interested in the application to energy storage materials.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, so which material classes are most likely to be effective guided by this method first? For example, the liquid electrolyte, solid electrolyte, SEI layers, or cathode materials?
Oh, this is quite a broad question. I think like each for the like energy storage materials, they have a different component. I think the hardest part is the interface. So the nature of the interface requires like a large scale simulation. You are not just going to study like a homogeneous part, and certainly if you bring the two very different chemistry together, that becomes a heterogeneous structure, and you need a long range machine learning potential to well capture the interactions. That's one thing. And second, we are not quite clear what on the full reaction or the energy landscape that happening at the interface. For example, the degradation. Molecular dynamics simulation can do like a nanosecond simulation, but but still now, I don't think that we have a very concrete simulation how the surface reactions are, the full description of the surface reactions. So how to better build a accurate model and that can run or capture the reactions at a longer time scale is important.
Yeah, exactly. I see. So, from the experimental side, because we all often have limited bandwidth to try out many candidates, so how can these methods or models can help experimental guys decide what to actually make and measure or verify?
I see. So, as I was mentioned before, for example, for the materials discovery, people first care about the thermodynamic stability. That's one thing. And now, with the capability of the foundation potential, for example, the KSRME is the one way people evaluate the related to the phonon entropy. Basically, you can calculate the contribution from the phonon or the vibration to the free energy. This can give you a better estimation of the stabilities or the synthesis abilities for the solid state materials. So what to look at is experimentally people certainly care about the synthesis ability, but this how the synthesis abilities can be correlated with atomistic simulation need a better approach. Building a very accurate foundation potential can help, but do not yet completely solve the problem.
I see. Thank you. Any other question? Okay, great. Because well, we are also technically time. Because we also have audience on YouTube. If you have other questions, you can always join our Discord for more discussions, or just email Dr. Zhong. Okay. Thank you again, Peichen, for for sharing us your excellent work. And thank you to all participants for joining. We look forward to seeing everyone in our next seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.